Good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. This is for Friday, November 15, 2024. Yeah, I'm thinking 2025 already, I guess. It's not that far off. Well, anyway, um, when we last met on the group here, that was for our sermon presentation last Saturday. We I said at the end that there was something that I had wanted to say after I finished the presentation, but I couldn't remember what it was. Well, then I remembered what it was. So we'll be getting to that shortly. There's a couple of other preliminaries we have to go with, one of which is this project that I've been doing at the house. And in fact, let me get the right pictures up here so we can remember where we were. And then we'll go here, and you can see that's the main water valve to our house. There was a plastic pipe going down to that, and I wanted to change that. So I built a little brick enclosure around it. And that was where I had left the project last week. This week, I added to the project by filling in around the brick enclosure and then building out of the boards I had bought for the project. I bought two boards, ended up only needing to use one, a wooden cover for it. So there's the wooden cover in place. You can see that I've bolted the wood to a second set of boards underneath that hold it in place. They fit down inside that brick enclosure. And then I did the best I could, as long as it sat there, it didn't survive very well, to replace the sod around the hole. So that's been done now, and that's roughly what the project looks like now. And one of the goals of this project was to have that covered recessed a little bit so I could run the mower right over it without that being a problem. So that's what we succeeded in doing. Now, the next thing is the thing that I wanted to tell you about last week and forgot. During the sermon last week, we mentioned the story of Saul's attempt to massacre the Gibeonites. And we brought up a picture out of Google Earth showing where we believe Gibeon was relative to ancient Jerusalem. And when I was looking for that, I ran across another place about a mile south of there that I thought was rather interesting. I spent some time looking at it in Google Earth. So we're going to go back to this view, and there is Al-Jib is right up here where I'm moving the cursor around a little bit. And down south, a little over a mile south, is this Nebi Samuel National Park. So I'm going to scroll on that. This is on top of a hill. You can kind of see the sides of the hill all around here. And I'm going to click on this so you can see the picture that has been associated with it. That's what the building looks like on top of that hill. And if I scroll down a bit, you will see that it says historic park with stone ruins centered around a Crusader fortress and the tomb of the prophet Samuel. Now, this gets interesting because there's, Street View allows you to see things that either Google has gotten by using its own employees to drive around with a special camera on the car, or by users who have those 360-degree cameras uploading locations that they have visited. And if you look inside this building, now remember, this was a Crusader fortress. Let me drop the thing here, and we'll go in, and you'll see inside this building. And as you look at the floor of the room, you'll see all those locations. If we turn so that we're facing south, you will see that all these prayer rugs are facing that direction. And there's a little, looks like a lectern area for an imam. Why do I say imam? Because if you look at this, these prayer rugs are all facing south. The lettering in the room is not Hebrew, it's Arabic. There's Arabic letters, there's Arabic in that. And if we zip around here, come on, there we go. And let's zoom down this way a little bit. This thing's not wanting to aggravation, this thing, you're supposed to, yeah, click to go, there we go. And you can see these posters on the wall here. Maybe if we can go one more step. Well, now they're the other side. That's what happens sometimes. Let that load in. Those are clearly Arabic things. So this is an Islamic prayer room built above what is believed to be the tomb of the prophet Samuel. Now, that was determined apparently in Crusader days when they built the fortress here, and this building is in the ruins apparently of that fortress. Now I'm going to get out here. I'm going to go to another location on this site that's down underneath. And there's the place I want to go. And if I click there, you'll see there's the stairs leading down into this. This is also built up of stone. But if you look at the letters here, these are not Arabic letters. These are Hebrew letters. And if you look at the garments of the people in the room, and I'm going to keep scrolling around here so that you can see this, you not only see the Hebrew characters, you see the Jewish garb and the Jewish way of keeping oneself. So this site is a Jewish holy site, and I'm not positive, but I believe that this location that these two men face is the actual tomb, or what they believe to be the tomb of the prophet Samuel. So I found that interesting that they'd have a site like that with Jewish and Islamic worship sites so close to each other. So we'll get out of that and go back to this. The other thing that's kind of a preliminary is that I got a question. It showed up in an email sometime yesterday, and so I spent part of my time yesterday answering the Bible question that was sent to me by email and sending the answer back via the website's tools. And so I'm going to read that now. So here it is. It comes from Chris, and the question is very simple. What is lust? So, dear Chris, thank you for visiting our site and for submitting your question about lust. Let me paste in a dictionary definition, and I actually went to Google and got the Oxford English Dictionary definition. So it starts out with a noun, lust. 1, very strong sexual desire. Sentence, he knew that his lust for her had returned. Also, a passionate desire for something, as in a lust for power. And then, with a tag theology, a sensual appetite regarded as sinful. Plural noun, lusts, as in lusts of the flesh. And then, of course, lust is also a verb. Third person lust, and then third person present lusts. Past tense lusted, past participle lusted, gerund or present participle lusting. And number 1, have a very strong sexual desire for someone. He really lusted after me in those days. Or another option, feel a strong desire for something. And their quote for that, this is kind of funny, pregnant women lusting for pickles and ice cream. Now that's the end of the dictionary definition. Those who translated the Bible into English used the word lust, or forms of it, to translate 3 Hebrew words and 4 Greek words. This word-for-word failure happens quite frequently, even in the King James Version. As an example, the King James used lusts in the following verses. But my people would not listen to me. Israel would not submit to me. So I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own devices. And that's Psalm 81, 11, and 12 out of the NIV. The King James Version uses lusts in place of stubborn hearts in verse 12, and that's the only time the King James Version translates the underlying Hebrew word, sheraruth, with lusts. The other 9 times that Hebrew word appears, the King James Version translates it imagination. While Robert Young says the word means stubbornness, enmity, and imagination. And that last word he may have thrown in there because that's how the King James translated it, even if that wasn't really particularly the meaning of the word. That's my own little toss in there. That wasn't part of the answer that I sent. Notice the theology reference in the definition above. Let's read a few New Testament occurrences of the word to see how the New Testament writers viewed the issue. And I'll put the words translated lust in the King James Version in italics. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. And that's from Romans 1:24. And we reference that once in a while when we define what God's wrath is and how it works. And you might have noticed that that text that we read earlier in Psalms said the same thing. I gave them over to their stubborn hearts. In other words, God, if we're stubborn enough, gives up and lets us have what we want, however detrimental to us and to him that is. Reading on. Therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal bodies, so that you obey its evil desires. In that case, sinful desires in the first verse, evil desires in the second verse. That was translated lust in the King James. What shall I say then? Is the law sin? Certainly not. Indeed, I would not have known what sin was except through the law. For I would not have known what coveting, or lust, really was if the law had not said, do not covet. And that's Romans 7, verse 7. And then one more verse. Rather, clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the sinful nature. That's Romans 13, verse 14. Now that last verse represents a case where the NIV lets us down. For some reason, they didn't want to render the Greek word sarx as flesh, as the King James Version translators did. But the clear meaning of the Greek word is flesh. It's the word John used in chapter 6 of his gospel when he reported Jesus calling on his disciples to eat my flesh. You may recall that, where Jesus called on his disciples to have an extremely intimate relationship with him and used the metaphor of eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And that was the teaching of Jesus that caused many people to leave him and no longer follow him. Again, I kind of stepped out of reading the answer, so let's go back to the answer. From verses like that, we get the saying about lusts of the flesh. That may help explain why most people sense that lust usually involves sexual desire. I think I read that sentence wrong. That may help explain most people's sense that lust usually involves sexual desire. Since sex involves powerful hormonal drives, some people get the idea that sex is inherently evil. But the Genesis account says God instructed the humans he had just created to be fruitful and increase in number. Genesis 1, verse 28. So the Creator designed us to have sexual desires, leading me to conclude the desire itself is not sinful. The selfish use humans tend to make of it, turns it into sin. The same could be said of many other lusts. We have to eat in order to live. God designed us to enjoy the process of eating. But when we approach the activity with selfish desire to extend the pleasure by eating after we've had enough, we can overeat, leading to health problems. Based on that, I would say the desire portion of lust isn't sinful. The overuse of the pleasure causes the problems. And one might ask why we so strongly desire the pleasure. Well, that's because we live in a sinful world where others impose pain on us. The pleasure negates the pain, or at least helps us to forget it. If the pain is imposed on us as children over a long time, it can cause complex trauma, which often leads to addiction to mind-altering substances like alcohol, weed, and illegal drugs. Of course, weed is illegal in some states still, but anyway. We can also view the matter as a question of priorities. Do you consider the needs of others as more important than your own? Do you consider your own long-term well-being over the pleasures of the moment? Do you place your relationship with your Creator above the drive for personal survival? In his first letter, or epistle, John wrote about the world and the things in it, calling on his readers not to love either. Quoting now, "For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world." 1 John 2, verse 16. The King James Version calls those worldly items the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. So let me conclude by offering my own definition of lust. Lust takes place when we place too high a value on the natural God-given desires and pleasures of daily life. When our response to our desires becomes destructive to ourselves or to others, we cross over from the healthy intended purpose of those desires into an unhealthy drive that blinds us to the outcomes of our choices. We begin to lust. Jesus once had a nighttime discussion with a Jewish religious leader. The Jews had convinced themselves that they earned God's favor through the accident of their birth. This leader, Nicodemus, apparently had doubts about that, so he came to talk things over with Jesus. He started the conversation by flattering Jesus. Jesus ignored him and said, "I tell you the truth, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born from above." John 3, verse 3. And I have substituted the meaning of the Greek for the traditional reading again. Jesus meant that in order for us to overcome the broken coping mechanisms life in this destructive world is all but forced on us, we need to be reparented to someone we can trust to never harm us. No human meets that definition, so Jesus called on people to come to him. You cannot trust someone you don't know, and you can't know someone without developing an intimate relationship with them. the Bible provides one of the means by which we come to know God. I encourage you to make regular personal Bible study part of your life, sincerely and so on. So it was a little bit longer than usual, in part because I pasted in that dictionary definition, but I thought that would be useful to the questioner to hear that. So,
I have a question for you.
all right.
Is there a difference between lust and craving?
Well, I think I'm going to say to that what I said in the answer, and that is that it is a natural part of living in a human body to desire things, to crave things. The question is, how do we set our priorities? Do we set our priorities so that those things do not supersede the more important things of life? Or do they take over and make us blind to the consequences of our actions on ourselves and on others, and thereby make us selfish and destructive, toxic humans?
I'm remembering when I was pregnant, I had this unreal need. It was a need. You know, they talk about women's cravings. I had this unreal need for watermelon. And it was a case of I was actually eating a watermelon a day. Is that, are you saying, I forgot what you said now, but are you saying that that's not something that would be a sin?
I'm not
That
saying that would be a sin unless your drive to consume watermelon turned you into a toxic person.
Well, I figured that there was something in that watermelon that my body needed. I was pregnant,
It could well
and
be.
the baby's zapping nutrients from me. I'm having to provide for both of us, and I figured all that watermelon I needed was a case of something in there that I was needing. In fact, it was so bad, as I recall, I was the subject of a lot of jokes because I had to have so much watermelon.
Yeah. Well, I've heard through the years
So it's hard to remember.
um, about this idea that if a pregnant woman craves something, it means she needs it. You go get it for her. And I can remember in my own toxic past when I was raised among toxic people who were control addicted and who believed that whatever they believed was right and everybody else had to knuckle under. We had somebody come to our institution. His wife was pregnant, and one night she craved hamburgers, so he took her off the institutional grounds to a hamburger joint and bought her a hamburger. And
Good for him.
everybody judged him harshly for that. But, maybe that's just what she needed at that point.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
I mean, craving watermelon is not like craving. I mean, it was sugary, yeah, fructose, but it wasn't like having candy bars.
Yeah. Well, I think we are ready to go ahead and get back into the book of Joshua. So let's.
Lust and I don't remember what you said now.
Lust and natural desires.
Well,
Hello?
like I said, I don't remember now what you said. I went to the doctor yesterday, and what did they ask me? Are you having trouble with your memory?
And she answered yes.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Well, like I say, let's prepare to go into the book of Joshua. So let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for the week that has passed and for the successes and victories and even the trials and tribulations of the week. And we are thankful for the times that you have been with us, and we regret those times when we took off without you. So now, as we open the written word, we don't want to take off without you. We want the Holy Spirit to be part of this by coming close to each person who listens. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So, here we are at Joshua chapter 6. We stopped off just before this. We kind of closed off last week with the confrontation between Joshua and this being that appeared to him. And he asked the being, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" And the being said, "Neither one. I'm here as the captain of the Lord's host." And that's essentially where that part of the story ends. Now, some people think that the instructions that we're about to read were part of that conversation. That's possible since they're next to each other. But I think the point that we ought to take from this, from that rather odd inclusion, is that God didn't really take sides here. He didn't say, "You're right and they're wrong, that's why I'm helping you." So why did he help them? Because the story you're about to read makes it quite clear that there was divine involvement. But if God was not playing favorites, why did he help the Israelites at this point? And let me suggest to you that this is a case of God honoring the commitments he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob back there in the book of Genesis, that the descendants of Abraham would get this land. So God does that, but it's not out of particular animus toward the people of the land. It's just God keeping his promise. So, we read chapter 6, verse 1, "Now the gates of Jericho were tightly shut because the people were afraid of the Israelites. No one was allowed to go out or in. But the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king, and all its strong warriors. You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark, each carrying a ram's horn. On the 7th day, you are to march around the town 7 times, with the priests blowing the horns. When you hear the priests give one long blast on the ram's horns, have all the people shout as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse, and the people can charge straight into the town." So Joshua called together the priests and said, "Take up the ark of the Lord's covenant, and assign 7 priests to walk in front of it, each carrying a ram's horn." Then he gave orders to the people, "March around the town, and the armed men will lead the way in front of the ark of the Lord." After Joshua spoke to the people, the 7 priests with the ram's horns started marching in the presence of the Lord, blowing the horns as they marched, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed behind them. Some of the armed men marched in front of the priests with the horns, and some behind the ark, with the priests continually blowing the horns. "Do not shout, do not even talk," Joshua commanded. "Not a single word from any of you until I tell you to shout. Then shout." So the ark of the Lord was carried around the town once that day, and then everyone returned to spend the night in the camp. Joshua got up early the next morning. The priests again carried the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests with a ram's horn marched in front of the ark of the Lord, blowing their horns. Again, the armed men marched both in front of the priests with the horns and behind the ark of the Lord. All this time, the priests were blowing their horns. On the second day, they again marched around the town once and returned to the camp. They followed this pattern for 6 days. Now, one thing I've wondered about this story, the narrative seems to be quite clear that they did what they were doing for 7 days straight. So one of those days had to be a Sabbath. Which one? We don't know. Did they perhaps start on the first day of the week and conclude this thing on Sabbath? Now that would probably offend some Seventh-day Sabbath-keeping people to think that the Jews would engage in their warfare on the Sabbath day. That's inappropriate. I might even agree with them. But I've always thought, well, one of those days, if they do it for 7 days in a row, had to be a Sabbath. Anyway. On the 7th day, the Israelites got up at dawn and marched around the town as they had done before. But this time, they went around the town 7 times. The 7th time around, as the priests sounded the long blast on their horns, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the town. Jericho and everything in it must be completely destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and the others in her house will be spared, for she protected our spies." Now, footnote A is going to be a reference to harem. They won't use that term here, but that's what the Hebrew term is, harem. And it's the Hebrew term used, refers to the complete consecration of things or people to the Lord, either by destroying them or by giving them as an offering, and similarly in verses 18 and 21. And this can be problematic for some people. So God demands that we worship Him by destroying things and animals and even people. I'd say, no, that's just the Jewish conception of what God wanted, and that's what they thought, so that's what they did. What?
Let's correct that. That's a human conception. It isn't just the Jews that read that and think God wants us to destroy things in His name.
No, yeah, that's right. A lot of people read this and they think, oh, well, see, God's showing how violent He can be when He thinks it's appropriate.
And since it's God doing it, that makes it right.
Yeah.
Right? Really?
Well, let me point out here that the divine intervention here involved the walls. That's it. The rest of what happened is on the Hebrew people. The use they made of what God did. Their conception of what God wanted. And that's how they then responded when God did what is clearly a divine intervention and making the walls fall down.
Well, now I heard they tried to explain this scientifically, and the explanation is that by marching around the town for 7 days, all that marching at that particular time messed with the ground, and when they did the 7th time, that it just couldn't hold up anymore. I don't know if I believe that. I'm not knowledgeable enough about that kind of thing.
Now, I find that unlikely.
Uh,
God may have used the waves of sound to aid in what he was doing, but I don't think the sound itself could have taken down those stone walls. And you can see there are pictures you can get today of remains of the wall of Jericho. It was not sloppily built. Verse 18, do not take any of the things set apart for destruction, or you yourselves will be completely destroyed, and you will bring trouble on the camp of Israel. Everything made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron is sacred to the Lord and must be brought into his treasury. When the people heard the sound of the ram's horns, they shouted as loud as they could. Suddenly, the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. They completely destroyed everything in it with their swords, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, goats, and donkeys. There's no word for this but slaughter or even genocide. That's what they did. But that was their choice. That's what they did with it. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the two spies, keep your promise. Go to the prostitute's house and bring her out along with all her family. The men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all the other relatives who were with her. They moved her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. Now, I recall years ago confronting this story and its disturbing elements, and wondering if perhaps the answer was that these people had some sort of communicable disease that would have destroyed the Israelites were it allowed to spread, and that's why God was ordering complete destruction to stop the spread. The only problem with that premise is the story of Rahab and her family. If in fact it was a communicable disease and Rahab lived there, then Rahab had it too. And
yeah.
Rahab became one of the ancestors of Jesus himself when he came to earth, because she married an Israelite. She was in the family line of David, along with Ruth the Moabitess. Anyway, so I think that wasn't a very good approach, because it kind of falls down once you get to that part of the story. Then the Israelites burned the town and everything in it. Only the things made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron were kept for the treasury of the Lord's house. So Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute and her relatives who were with her in the house, because she had hidden the spies Joshua sent to Jericho. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. It gives us a clue about when this book was written. It was written during Rahab's lifetime. At that time, Joshua invoked this curse. May the curse of the Lord fall on anyone who tries to rebuild the town of Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest son, he will set up its gates. Now, that's just a reference to the steps of building a city. You'd have to lay the foundation and then build the walls. And once you had finished the walls, then the last thing you did would be to set up the gates to provide a way for people to pass through the wall into and out of the city, but be able to close the gates if there were a siege laid against the city. And this forecast that Joshua made actually did take place. That's recorded in, I believe, the book of 1 Kings. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his reputation spread throughout the land. And that concludes chapter 6. So we move on. Chapter 7, but Israel violated the instructions about the things set apart for the Lord. I'll bet you that A is going to tell us that it's the Hebrew term. Yeah, it's the Hiram again. A man named Achan had stolen some of these dedicated things, so the Lord was very angry with the Israelites. Achan was the son of Carmi, a descendant of Zimri, son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah. And the footnote after Zimri there is just an alternative spelling of the name that, let's go down and look at it. Footnote B. As in the parallel text at 1 Chronicles 2, verse 6, the Hebrew reads Zabdi, also in 7:17 and 18. Joshua sent some of his men from Jericho to spy out the town of Ai, east of Bethel, near Beth-aven. When they returned, they told Joshua, "There's no need for all of us to go up there. It won't take more than 2,000 or 3,000 men to attack Ai. Since there are so few of them, don't make all our people struggle to go up there." So approximately 3,000 warriors were sent, but they were soundly defeated. The men of Ai chased the Israelites from the town gate as far as the quarries, and they killed about 36 who were retreating down the slope. The Israelites were paralyzed with fear at this turn of events, and their courage melted away. Footnote C as far as Shebarim. All right, so do you transliterate or do you translate? Good question. Joshua and the elders of Israel tore their clothing in dismay, threw dust on their heads, and bowed face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord until evening. Then Joshua cried out, "O sovereign Lord, why did you bring us across the Jordan River if you are going to let the Amorites kill us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side. Lord, what can I say now that Israel has fled from its enemies? For when the Canaanites and all the other people living in the land hear about it, they will surround us and wipe our name off the face of the earth. And then what will happen to the honor of your great name?" So Joshua presses his issues here, and we can see that at the moment he's operating out of fear. He's afraid of what's going to happen. If the people of the land hear that the people of Ai had been able to defeat the Israelites, they might come together and fight us and wipe us out. Well, that's what we intend to do to them, so no wonder you might have that fear that they might do it to you. That sounds pretty straightforward and sensible. But the Lord said to Joshua, "Get up. Why are you lying on your face like this? Israel has sinned and broken my covenant. They have stolen some of the things that I commanded must be set apart for me. And they have not only stolen them, but have lied about it and hidden the things among their own belongings. That is why the Israelites are running from their enemies in defeat. For now Israel itself has been set apart for destruction. I will not remain with you any longer unless you destroy the things among you that were set apart for destruction." Now, is God's focus here on the need for destruction, or is the focus here on the need to find and root out the greed that led to this failure to follow the instructions? Because the real issue here is that this person got greedy and lusted after the fine garments and the wealth, and he thought, I'm going to help myself to some of this stuff, even though I'm not supposed to. That way I'll be better off than everybody else who did what God said to do. So God's dealing with that attitude. And The defeat here is because God acted in his wrath, understanding how God's wrath works. That is, that he gives us over to what we want. The Israelites had done this, so God left them and let things naturally take their course. God continues, get up, command the people to purify themselves in preparation for tomorrow, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Hidden among you, O Israel, are things set apart for the Lord. You will never defeat your enemies until you remove these things from among you. And one thing that I think may be active here, and that is that part of the Hebrew religious system involved the importance of first fruits, the firstborn, the first fruits. These belonged to God. So, with the first conquest in Canaan, God is setting his claim on it. This is your first fruits of taking the land. It belongs to me. Do not take part of it. In the morning, you must present yourselves by tribes, and the Lord will point out the tribe to which the guilty man belongs. That tribe must come forward with its clans, and the Lord will point out the guilty clan. That clan will then come forward, and the Lord will point out the guilty family. Finally, each member of the guilty family must come forward, one by one. The one who has stolen what was set apart for destruction will himself be burned with fire along with everything he has, for he has broken the covenant of the Lord and has done a horrible thing in Israel. So, early the next morning, Joshua brought the tribes of Israel before the Lord, and the tribe of Judah was singled out. Now, the text here doesn't tell us exactly how this was done. People generally believe it was done by lot. It might have been by Urim and Thummim. We don't know. We don't know exactly how that worked anyway. But in some way, there was a choice made. And we know from the outcome that the choices made were indeed accurate. Then the clans of Judah came forward, and the clan of Zerah was singled out. Then the families of Zerah came forward, and the family of Zimri was singled out. Every member of Zimri's family was brought forward person by person, and Achan was singled out. Then Joshua said to Achan, my son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, by telling the truth. Give glory to God was, in the Hebrew mindset, a solemn oath or charge to tell the truth. Kind of like the oath we give in our courts. Do you swear or solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give in this matter shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, under penalty of perjury? Different courts will use different language for that, but that's the general idea. Make your confession and tell me what you have done. Don't hide it from me. Achan replied, it is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. Among the plunder I saw a beautiful robe from Babylon or Chaldea, 200 silver coins, and a bar of gold weighing more than a pound. I wanted them so much that I took them. They are hidden in the ground beneath my tent, with the silver buried deeper than the rest. Now there's a bunch of footnotes there, D, E, and F, and those are mostly conversions. The first one says Shinar, not Chaldea, but Shinar, Chaldea, Babylon, pretty much all the same place. Then the 200 shekels of silver is about 5 pounds or 2.3 kilograms in weight. And then the Hebrew is 50 shekels, or about 20 ounces, or 570 grams in weight. And it's 453.6 grams per pound, as I recall. I used to have that conversion memorized because I had to do conversions from pounds to kilograms in order to calculate some of the things I needed to calculate for our air permit and other things. So there's that. That's about how much was going on. You figure a pound of gold. Well, when I was a kid, gold was $32 an ounce, so 16 times 32, that was how much the gold was worth. But of course, that was a long time ago. Nowadays, it would be worth a whole lot more. So Joshua sent some men to make a search. They ran to the tent and found the stolen goods hidden there, just as Achan had said, and the silver buried beneath the rest. They took the things from the tent and brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites. Then they laid them on the ground in the presence of the Lord. Then Joshua and all the Israelites took Achan, the silver, the robe, the bar of gold, his sons, daughters, cattle, donkeys, sheep, goats, tent, and everything he had, and they brought them to the valley of Achor. Then Joshua said to Achan, "Why have you brought trouble on us? The Lord will now bring trouble on you." And all the Israelites stoned Achan and his family and burned their bodies. They piled a great heap of stones over Achan, which remains to this day. That is why the place has been called the Valley of Trouble, or the Valley of Achor, ever since. So the Lord was no longer angry. Now, if you read this as it's written, then you see God being placated by death and destruction. But maybe God was placated by the people having dealt with the toxicity and selfishness among them. However harshly they did it, that was their choice. But then the Lord would go on and be with and bless the people. Moving on to the next chapter then. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid or discouraged. Take all your fighting men and attack Ai, for I have given you the king of Ai, his people, his town, and his land. You will destroy them as you destroyed Jericho and its king. But this time you may keep the plunder and the livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the town." Now, I just happen to think we know where Jericho is because there's still a modern city of Jericho built on the site. But what about Ai? Do we know where that, or do we think we know where that was? So I'm going to get out my Bible dictionary here, and H-I-A-I. Ai, or heap, a city lying east of Bethel and beside Beth Aven. It was the second city taken by Israel after the passage of the Jordan and was utterly destroyed. Its site is found at Hayon, about 2 miles southeast of Bethel. Ai was also a city of the Ammonites, apparently attached to Heshbon, Jeremiah 49, verse 3. So, I'm not really familiar with where Bethel is. I'm not going to bring up Google Earth at this point to try and find it, but it was in the vicinity, apparently. So Joshua and all the fighting men set out to attack Ai. Joshua chose 30,000 of his best warriors and sent them out at night with these orders: hide in ambush close behind the town and be ready for action. When our main army attacks, the men of Ai will come out to fight as they did before, and we will run away from them. We will let them chase us until we have drawn them away from the town, for they will say, "The Israelites are running away from us," as they did before. Then, while we are running from them, you will jump up from your ambush and take possession of the town, for the Lord your God will give it to you. Set the town on fire, as the Lord has commanded. You have your orders. So they left and went to the place of ambush between Bethel and the west side of Ai. But Joshua remained among the people in the camp that night. Early the next morning, Joshua roused his men and started toward Ai, accompanied by the elders of Israel. All the fighting men who were with Joshua marched in front of the town and camped on the north side of Ai, with a valley between them and the town. That night Joshua sent about 5,000 men to lie in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the town. So they stationed the main army north of the town and the ambush west of the town. Joshua himself spent that night in the valley. When the king of Ai saw the Israelites across the valley, he and his army hurried out early in the morning and attacked the Israelites at a place overlooking the Jordan Valley. But they didn't realize there was an ambush behind the town. Joshua and the Israelite army fled toward the wilderness as though they were badly beaten. Then all the men in the town were called out to chase after them. In this way they were lured from the town. There was not a man left in Ai or Bethel who did not chase after the Israelites, and the town was left wide open. Now there's a footnote B there. Hebrew reads the Araba, that back in verse 14. And then some manuscripts lack or Bethel, so not all manuscripts say Bethel there. Then the Lord said to Joshua, point the spear in your hand toward Ai, for I will hand the town over to you. Joshua did as he was commanded. As soon as Joshua gave this signal, all the men in ambush jumped up from their position and poured into the town. They quickly captured it and set it on fire. When the men of Ai looked behind them, smoke from the town was filling the sky, and they had nowhere to go. For the Israelites who had fled in the direction of the wilderness now turned on their pursuers. When Joshua and all the other Israelites saw that the ambush had succeeded and that smoke was rising from the town, they turned and attacked the men of Ai. Meanwhile, the Israelites who were inside the town came out and attacked the enemy from the rear. So the men of Ai were caught in the middle, with Israelite fighters on both sides. Israel attacked them, and not a single person survived or escaped. Again, genocide. Only the king of Ai was taken alive and brought to Joshua. When the Israelite army finished chasing and killing all the men of Ai in the open fields, they went back and finished off everyone inside. So the entire population of Ai, including men and women, was wiped out that day, 12,000 in all. For Joshua kept holding his spear until everyone who had lived in Ai was completely destroyed. And again, that would be the harem. Only the livestock and the treasures of the town were not destroyed, for the Israelites kept these as plunder for themselves, as the Lord had commanded Joshua. So Joshua burned the town of Ai, and it became a permanent mound of ruins, desolate to this very day. Footnote D, Ai means ruin or heap. Okay, yeah. Joshua impaled the king of Ai on a sharpened pole and left him there until evening. At sunset, the Israelites took down the body as Joshua commanded and threw it in front of the town gate. They piled a great heap of stones over him that can still be seen today. Now, that verse 29 there is in keeping with instructions that we kind of skipped over as we went through the books of Moses. One of the instructions they had was that if you hang up a body, you don't leave it there overnight. At sunset, you take it down. And so they did what they were commanded. You have a question?
Yeah, it's a comment. It hurts to hear this.
It does.
It does. That dead body used to be a living, breathing human.
Right.
And what did they do to him?
Well, I expect that whatever they did to him was extremely painful.
Yeah, they robbed him of his life.
Yes.
They could not return that.
Well, I think as we mentioned in our sermon presentation last week, sometimes the people were more concerned about respecting the body than they were about respecting the person before that person became a carcass. And shouldn't it be more important to respect the living person than the carcass? Because the carcass is just the dust of the earth that's left over.
You can't sit down and have a two-way conversation with a carcass.
No.
You know, But I'll be quiet. It just hurts to hear all that.
Well, of course it does, and it should. We should see the destructive way these people acted and understand that's part of the problem that didn't get solved, and why these people, their descendants, would in the future execute God Himself when He came to visit them. We're seeing,
And then God gets blamed for all
and
this.
then we're seeing the root causes of what actually happens. Yes.
And God is, and we're told and expected to believe that this is what God wants.
No, this is just what the world is like when it has separated itself from the Creator.
And look at what's going on out there in the world.
Yeah. People may be a little less violent today. We may have slightly more respect for human life, but we're still pretty messed up.
If you're not familiar with it, get on YouTube and look up Turtle Boy, The Glarer,
The young jerks.
look what's happening with Karen Reed. What they're doing to this poor woman. I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with what's happening with her.
Yeah.
And I see it happening to other people too. But this is one person that has had the strength to fight the system. And it's just so upsetting to see how corrupt things are out there. The world is just so evil.
Which is why we look forward to a time when God brings this whole mess to an end. We don't know when that's going to happen, but we do know that God has given us a limited amount of time to bear up under it. And that the, quotes, light affliction that we suffer at this point, the hurt that we endure as we read this nonsense, is going to work for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory.
In our church, there are people that will teach you that God, when God returns, in order to do away with the pain, He will miraculously erase our memory of all the bad things.
But that doesn't make sense with the other teaching that God is using us, the human race, to inoculate the universe against sin. How can we do that if we don't remember it?
May I finish?
Go ahead.
What was I saying? You interrupted me. I forgot.
Well, you were talking about people saying that God would miraculously erase our memories.
I don't think that's what's going to happen.
No.
I think what's going to happen is we're going to realize that it's best to just not even think about it. It's too painful to think about, and lock that memory away and don't deal with it anymore. You can't bear to think on it. You know, you get on with your life, and you learn that there is something so much better there for us. And that we don't have to come up with this nonsense anymore. But to erase our memories would be to erase the knowledge that we would need to have in order to keep it from happening again.
Yes. That's what I was saying.
I'm through.
Okay. Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, at Mount Ebal. He followed the commands that Moses, the Lord's servant, had written in the book of instruction. Make me an altar from stones that are uncut and have not been shaped with iron tools. That's from Exodus 20, verse 25, and then in Deuteronomy 27, verses 5 through 6. We ran over that recently. Then on the altar they presented burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord, and as the Israelites watched, Joshua copied onto the stones of the altar the instructions Moses had given them, or onto the stones. Yeah, so the altar is what the translators have added. The instructions Moses had given them. Then all the Israelites, foreigners and native born alike, along with the elders, officers, and judges, were divided into two groups. One group stood in front of Mount Gerizim, the other in front of Mount Ebal. Each group faced the other, and between them stood the Levitical priests carrying the Ark of the Lord's covenant. This was all done according to the commands that Moses, the servant of the Lord, had previously given for blessing the people of Israel. Joshua then read to them all the blessings and curses Moses had written in the book of instruction, the Old Covenant, in other words. Every word of every command that Moses had ever given was read to the entire assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. So that concludes chapter 8. We move on to chapter 9. And now we get to the topic that we referenced in our sermon presentation last week, namely the Gibeonites. Now, all the kings west of the Jordan River heard about what had happened. These were the kings of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. I counted 6 there, who lived in the hill country in the western foothills and along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, as far north as the Lebanon Mountains. These kings combined their armies to fight as one against Joshua and the Israelites. Well, that makes sense. You face a common enemy, you set aside your differences and unite to fight that common enemy. Deal with your other differences later. 2 footnotes there already, A and B. Footnote A says Shephelah, and footnote B says the Great Sea. So whatever is the Shephelah, that's the western foothills, is how they translated it. Yes, Mia, why don't you get up here so people can see you? You keep begging for attention, but you don't get up here. Oh well. But when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to deception to save themselves. They sent ambassadors to Joshua, loading their donkeys with weathered saddlebags and old patched wineskins. They put on worn-out patched sandals and ragged clothes, and the bread they took with them was dry and moldy. When they arrived at the camp of Israel at Gilgal, they told Joshua and the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant land to ask you to make a peace treaty with us." The Israelites replied to these Hivites, "How do we know you don't live nearby? For if you do, we cannot make a treaty with you." They replied, "We are your servants." "But who are you?" Joshua demanded. "Where do you come from?" They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country. We have heard of the might of the Lord your God and of all he did in Egypt. We have also heard what he did to the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all our people instructed us, take supplies for a long journey. Go meet with the people of Israel and tell them, we are your servants. Please make a treaty with us. This bread was hot from the ovens when we left our homes, but now, as you can see, it is dry and moldy. These wineskins were new when we filled them, but now they are old and split open, and our clothing and sandals are worn out from our very long journey. So the Israelites examined their food, but they did not consult the Lord. Then Joshua made a peace treaty with them and guaranteed their safety, and the leaders of the community ratified their agreement with a binding oath. 3 days after making the treaty, they learned that these people actually lived nearby. The Israelites set out at once to investigate and reached their towns in 3 days. The names of these towns were Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack the towns, for the Israelite leaders had made a vow to them in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. The people of Israel grumbled against their leaders because of the treaty. But the leaders replied, "Since we have sworn an oath in the presence of the Lord, the God of Israel, we cannot touch them. This is what we must do. We must let them live, for divine anger would come upon us if we broke our oath. Let them live." So they made them woodcutters and water carriers for the entire community, as the Israelite leaders directed. Excuse me. Joshua called together the Gibeonites and said, "Why did you lie to us? Why did you say that you live in a distant land when you live right here among us? May you be cursed. From now on you will always be servants who cut wood and carry water for the house of my God." Yeah, fuss. They replied, "We did it because we, your servants, were clearly told that the Lord your God commanded his servant Moses to give you this entire land and to destroy all the people living in it. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you. That is why we have done this. Now we are at your mercy. Do to us whatever you think is right." So Joshua did not allow the people of Israel to kill them, but that day he made the Gibeonites the woodcutters and water carriers for the community of Israel and for the altar of the Lord, wherever the Lord would choose to build it. And that is what they do to this day. Now, here on out, it starts getting kind of, shall I say, repetitive, because it's just more descriptions of what they go on. So, King Adonizedek of Jerusalem asked for help. The 5 Amorite kings combined their armies for united attack. They moved all their troops into place and attacked Gibeon. The men of Gibeon quickly sent messengers to Joshua to camp at Gilgal. Well, now that's that's a very human thing. Somebody worked out a treaty that you won't get. They did it by deception. You get mad at them. You decide to try to wipe them out. Well, now the Israelites, because of their foolish pledge, have to jump in and take action. It says, "So Joshua and his entire army, including his best warriors, left Gilgal and set out for Gibeon. Took the Amorite armies by surprise. As the Amorites retreated down the road from Beth Horon, the Lord destroyed them with a terrible hailstorm from heaven that continued until they reached Azekah. The hail killed more of the enemy than the Israelites killed with a sword. On the day the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel. He said, 'Let the sun stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Aijalon.' So the sun stood still and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. Is this event not recorded in the book of Jashar, or footnote to be the book of the upright? All right. The sun stayed in the middle of the sky and it did not set as on a normal day. There's never been a day like this one before or since when the Lord answered such a prayer. Surely the Lord fought for Israel that day. Then Joshua and the Israelite army returned to their camp at Gilgal." So this is the story where the sun and the moon stayed in place for a period of time. Normal day C did not set for about a whole day. Yeah. There was, back in the days before the internet, there were still things that got circulated, usually by being copied, and in those days copying process wasn't real great, and the copies made wouldn't be all that good, and then people would make copies of the copies, and then copies of those copies, and pretty soon the thing was hardly readable. But one of the things that circulated back when I was young was a story that somebody obviously made up, saying that a certain observatory was going through and calculating the amount of time from the beginning of Earth until now, and their calculations didn't come out. Well, there happened to be a Christian on the thing, and he said, well, you got to consider the story of Joshua. And so they added in the story of Joshua. Well, that made it come out closer, but it still wasn't right. Well, then this Christian in the thing said, well, there's also the story of Hezekiah and the sun going back 15 degrees. Of course, the term degrees is a misnomer. It wasn't an exact measurement. It was the steps on the stairway or something. But anyway, so they added that in, and then everything came out exactly right. Therefore, the Bible was proven to be true because, but I mean, about a day. I mean, even if you assume that that's what it actually said, how could you be precise with it? I mean, it's all ridiculous. But it got passed around, and some people apparently believed it. Anyway, Joshua kills the 5 southern kings. Israel destroys the southern towns. Moving on to 11, Israel defeats the northern armies. And, there'll be additional stories of what happens in here, but things are not as familiar or well known out of these. And again, the harem was used. Kings defeated east of the Jordan. Sihon and Og. Kings defeated west of the Jordan. So we've got the king of Jericho, Ai near Bethel, Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, Eglon, Gezer, Debir, Gader, Hormah, Arad, Libnah, Adullam, Makkedah, Bethel, Tefuah, Hepher, Aphek, Lasharon, Madon, Hazor, Shimron, Meron, Aksaph, Tanach, Megiddo, Kadesh, Jokneam in Carmel, Dor in the town of Naphoth Dor, Goyim in the king of Goyim in Gilgal, the king of Tirzah. In all, 31 kings were defeated. The land yet to be conquered. It says, when Joshua was an old man, the Lord said to him, you're growing old, and much land remains to be conquered. This is the territory that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and the Geshurites, and the larger territory of the Canaanites, extending from the stream of Shihor on the border of Egypt, northward to the boundary of Ekron. It includes the territory of the 5 Philistine rulers of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. Now remember, these were people that were supposed to be the objects of a treaty. So we have the oddity of the Israelites honoring a more recent treaty made with the Gibeonites, but not really honoring the treaty made with the Philistines. But then again, the Philistines didn't honor that treaty either. It's just, we point that out. Land divided east of the Jordan. Who gets the land? An allotment for the tribe of Levi. The land given to the tribe of Reuben. The land given to the tribe of Gad. The land given to the half-tribe of Manasseh. That's all the land that was east of the Jordan, out of the territories of Sihon and Og. Then the land divided west of the Jordan. So Caleb requests his land. He says, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land of Canaan. And they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So at that point, he was 80. And now he's going
That
on.
wasn't fair to him.
What?
That really wasn't fair to him to have to wait until he was old.
Well, no, but it's what happened.
But life isn't fair.
No. But my brothers who went with me frightened the people from entering the promised land. For my part, I wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. So that day Moses solemnly promised me, the land of Canaan on which you were just walking will be your grant of land and that of your descendants forever, because you wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. Now, as you can see, the Lord has kept me alive and well, as he promised, for all these 45 years since Moses made this promise. So we're dealing with about 5 years after the death of Moses and the entry into the promised land when these things are happening. Today I'm 85 years old. I'm as strong now as I was when Moses sent me on that journey, and I can still travel and fight as well as I could then. So give me the hill country that the Lord promised me. You will remember that as scouts we found the descendants of Anak living there in great walled towns. But if the Lord is with me, I will drive them out of the land, just as the Lord said. So Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave Hebron to him as his portion of the land. Hebron still belongs to the descendants of Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, because he wholeheartedly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Previously, Hebron had been called Kiriath Arba. It had been named after Arba, a great hero of the descendants of Anak. And the land had rest from war. Well, not really. As we read on, particularly in the book of Judges, we'll find out that the Israelites never, ever really successfully escaped war. That was the nature of the human race at that time. That's how they lived. They lived for and by war. And so that's what they did. And there were short periods of peace, but even those were interrupted by various wars. The people just couldn't help it. They kept doing it. Then in chapter 15, we have the land given to the tribe of Judah, the land given to Caleb, the towns allotted to Judah. So that's the end of that chapter. Move on to the next chapter, Ephraim and West Manasseh. Remember that Ephraim and Manasseh were both the sons of Joseph, so this was essentially land given to the tribe of Joseph. There's West Manasseh, the other half of the tribe that didn't take their possession on the east bank of the Jordan. The allotments of the remaining lands, allotment given to Benjamin, the towns given to Benjamin, land given to Simeon, land given to Zebulun, land given to Issachar, land given to Asher, land given to Naphtali, land given to Dan. That's the seventh allotment. The land given to Joshua. The cities of refuge. And we'll stop and read this. This may be the last thing we get to. The Lord said to Joshua, "Now tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed Moses. Anyone who kills another person accidentally and unintentionally can run to one of these cities. They will be places of refuge from relatives seeking revenge for the person who was killed, or from the avenger of blood. Upon reaching one of these cities, the one who caused the death will appear before the elders at the city gate and present his case. They must allow him to enter the city and give him a place to live among them. If the relatives of the victim come to avenge the killing, the leaders must not release the slayer to them, for he killed the other person unintentionally and without previous hostility. But the slayer must stay in that city and be tried by the local assembly, which will render a judgment, and he must continue to live in that city until the death of the high priest who was in office at the time of the accident. After that, he is free to return to his own home in the town from which he fled." The following cities were designated as cities of refuge: Kadesh of Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. On the east side of the Jordan River, across from Jericho, the following cities were designated: Bezer in the wilderness plain of the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead in the territory of the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan in the land of the tribe of Manasseh. These cities were set apart for all the Israelites as well as the foreigners living among them. Anyone who accidentally killed another person could take refuge in one of these cities. In this way, they could escape being killed in revenge prior to standing trial before the local assembly. And we've talked briefly about that in the past, that this was a limit that God set on the wickedness of his people. What sense does it make if somebody has died to add to the count of the dead? How does that fix anything? Well, it doesn't. It just satisfies our broken human sense of, quotes, justice or revenge. Well, you do it to me, I'll do it to you. Now the world's even. Well, no, the world's not even. The world's down 2 people now. And of course, once that happens, then the cycle never ends. You kill my brother, I kill your brother. Oh, well, now I kill your brother. Well, when does it end? Well, when there aren't any brothers left, I suppose. But then what do? There's nobody left. They ate each other up, kind of a thing. So, but this was a limit that God set on it. And the priest stood in the place as a representative of the people to God. So in a sense, the priest was a metaphor for Jesus Christ. And the whole bit about having to stay in the city until the death of the high priest, first of all, that prevented, it set a time limit on how long it was, but it was a metaphorical time limit because it could be a long time or a short time before the current high priest died. A generation of time, usually, depending on what caused the death and so forth. But Jesus died, and when he died, that set us free from sin. So we were no longer restricted in what we could do because Jesus had now broken the chains of sin through his own death and set us free. So then, as the individual was free to return to his land after the death of the high priest, so after the death of Christ, we are free to return to the condition in which God created us and intended us to live. We can do that because Jesus died, and after his death now, that's possible and we can do it. So I that's what I see as the metaphorical meaning of this whole cities of refuge thing. And I see that our time is just about up, and we have reached chapter 20. How many more chapters are there? Let's just look, Joshua. There are 4 more chapters. Towns given the Levites, eastern tribes return home. Joshua's final words to Israel, the Lord's covenant reviewed. We may make it next week into the into the book of Judges. So that'll be an interesting thing to see if we get there. So we hope that you found something useful out of what we covered here, and that you have been enabled to see God in a new light, hopefully. And we'll continue this our next week, next Friday night, when we again do our Friday night Bible study. And until then, we say goodbye and God bless.